final aspect I touched on is comparing how MS relates to other immune-mediated diseases in terms of features of the prodromal phase. So this is work that I wasn't involved with, but one study from Canada essentially showed that psychiatric disorders were common in the 5 to 10 years before diagnosis of an immune-mediated inflammatory disease. So they combined people with MS, rheumatoid arthritis, and inflammatory bowel disease relative to a matched cohort. And psychiatric disorders were common 5 to 10 years before diagnosis of one of those diseases. And they also obviously broke it down separately for MS, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and found similar patterns for each disease. Another interesting study, this was a collaboration between the UK and France, I wasn't involved with, and they compared MS with systemic lupus and also Crohn's disease. Now, they could only access primary care data or visits to the general practitioner, and they looked at the 5 years before diagnosis of one of these conditions, not onset. But nonetheless, I think their findings were interesting. So for them, visits to the general practitioner didn't differ for the MS cases and people with systemic lupus, but the MS cases did differ relative to people with Crohn's disease. So, for example, in the 5 years before diagnosis, they found more sexual dysfunction and urinary tract infection related visits were more common for the MS cases relative to people with Crohn's disease. But things like constipation were more common for Crohn's disease relative to MS. So, of course, what does this tell us? It shows us that there's evidence for shared features across immune-mediated diseases in the years leading up to diagnosis, at least, of these conditions. They weren't able to look at the years before onset. But nonetheless, it shows that there's overlap, and it really emphasizes the need for additional markers if we want to identify multiple sclerosis earlier.